In the bustling world of technology and connectivity, one trend stands out, gaining momentum and making waves in the fabric of modern communication. This trend, my dear listeners, is none other than podcasting.
I took a Renaissance class. I didn't even know that they snuck in to do this.
Postmodern abstract expressionist art had taken over all art schools.
I saw a video once recently of someone who took their shoe off and just placed it in the museum, and people just started taking photos, and it was just someone's shoe on the ground.
Yep. Opportunities for artists are going to slowly go away. The studios are going to basically cut 90% of their art staff. They're going to keep the top 10%, and they are the ones that are going to work with the AI. So aphantasia is actually the inability to picture anything in your mind.
Found that fascinating. I can't close my eyes and picture an apple.
I could mess this completely up, and I could fail. But make sure that you're pushed past what you think you can do. It's a dilemma for artists. Yeah.
Like, you're better off going into technology versus art, and that's how you're going to indirectly work with it.
Hello, everyone. I will not be a part of the episode you're about to watch here today, nor will I be a part of the next episode when that is released. At the end of August, we had a incident that involved a very famous hockey player, where him and his brother were traveling in a small town in New Jersey the day before their sister's wedding, when a drunk driver struck them while they were riding their bicycles and killed them. It affects not only the sports world, but all of us, as we were captivated by how someone with such life on the ice and life in the community could be gone within an instant. And we took for granted how lives can change like that. And then, within a week, personally, I lost someone to a drunk driving accident where a drunk driver struck and killed someone I knew. This is an epidemic. This is not something that is talked about in the same regards as fentanyl overdoses and drug overdoses. But it affects all of us just as much. Every year, many people get behind the wheel of a car inebriated. Fewer get arrested for DUIs. We need to be better as a society to stop getting behind the wheel when we're intoxicated. Because not only does it affect our own lives and our families' lives, it affects the lives of everyone in the community. And it affects the lives of people that you interact with. These are people that don't deserve to lose their life or to have their life upended one day because of a poor decision you made. So I'm here asking all of you to please be better. Please don't get behind the wheel of a car when you're intoxicated, when you're inebriated. And please don't allow it to happen. If you notice it, do something to stop it before the person gets on the road. This is something that is not going to be fixed overnight. But if everyone can do their part, we can limit the amount of people that are affected by drunk driving and drunk drivers. Thank you. God be with you. And God bless the United States.
Hey guys, welcome back to Just Yakkin. Welcome to episode 11. This is a very special episode. And we figured we'd bring on two special guests. So I'm Justin.
I'm Jared.
Jess?
John.
And
Jays.
yeah, I didn't even realize that. The All Jays episode. These two on the corner of the couch are both artists, and John, because Rob canceled last second, it was kind of unfortunate.
He just had prior commitments that he recognized in the morning. He was just like, "Oh, I'll let you guys know later." So we found out before, decided to have Jessica on. So
yeah, but we contacted John. I'd say probably like 2 months ago, or not, like a month ago, right? Like I'd say a couple weeks ago, and
roughly.
He is phenomenal. I'll put some pictures from your Instagram up on the screen right now to see like what he actually does, and it's mind-boggling, especially like walking up to it. And we were like, we're gonna shoot for the stars here. As we were driving to the university the one day, we were like, let's just see if we can get in contact. And you shot your shot.
Yeah, I just sent out a business email because it was like, "Oh, this is my business email if you'd like to contact me." And I'm like, "Okay."
Yeah.
Sent out an email. You got back, and then there we go. And then we met you the one day, at the place you're actually working.
Yeah.
You said you were off today, but you actually went back and started working. Is that?
Yeah, I was feeling kind of like exhausted yesterday morning because I haven't taken a day off in a while, and I was making a lot of mistakes in the morning, and I was like, "Fuck, I better just take tomorrow off." And then had lunch, took a little nap, and had a great afternoon. Kind of figured out I'm working on this bagpiper right now, and painting all the bagpipes, and they're pretty technical, and so it took me a couple hours to figure out the system that I needed to use, because there's so much repetition that I'm like, I was using an inconsistent style, and it was just messing me up the entire morning. So I thought I really needed a day off. But then once I figured out what I needed to do, I was like re-energized, and then this morning I was like, no, I want to go work.
Do you use a reference photo then?
Yeah. So everything has to be completely designed way ahead of time. Because the way that I do the transfer for the entire thing is because the walls are situated next to a freeway entrance and exit, there's no way to project, which is normally what I'll use is like a projector. I have to basically do this style called pouncing, where I make a to-scale stencil of the entire wall. So 6,000 square feet for each wall, basically. And then you take all the paper that has the mural printed on it, and you have to take this machine called a pouncing machine, which is just basically like an electronic pen, and you have to draw over all of the lines, and then that punches thousands of tiny holes through the lines. Then you put the sheets of paper up on the wall one by one, and tape them in place, make sure that they're perfectly placed, and then you take a bag of graphite powder and rub over each line, and it creates a tiny dotted line.
Oh, wow.
So that's not just pencil. I thought it was just like some kind of like...
It's actually like powder, graphite powder.
I was so curious on how you guys were able to scale your objects, your like... Because I was just sitting there, like, from the ground view, like, you looking up, like, how would you know what it would look like?
So scaling is the number one issue when you're painting a mural. No matter how good you are in a sketchbook or a canvas, it's like, how can you scale that up to 5 stories or 4 stories or something? And so there's a lot of different techniques. And once you learn the techniques, it's actually pretty straightforward. It's still difficult. There's a lot of work involved. But it's not like astrophysics. Like, you can comprehend it. Like, it doesn't take a genius to go, oh, okay, I see what you have to do.
I've always heard about it, but I've never actually, like, gone through the process because I don't have, like, any reason to. It's not like I'm doing a mural, so I've always heard about it, and I find it so cool, like, that it's that in-depth.
Yeah, so pouncing, too, is like, it's the number one way to kind of get large-scale murals up on a wall. Like, when you see those big billboards that sometimes get painted in New York that are 9 stories tall, those are all pounced, because at that scale you can't even project. You'd have to project in so many sections, and you're dealing with distortion and all kinds of...
And realigning.
Yeah. And it's also the oldest way of transferring murals. So pouncing is how Michelangelo did the Sistine Chapel. He just didn't have a machine. So what he would do is... he would draw a life-size drawing. So they called it a cartoon. That's where the word originates from. So he would, like, say it's a Jonah being swallowed by the whale on the chapel ceiling, and he's like 12 feet tall. So he would put together giant sheets of paper that were 12 feet tall, and then he'd sketch out exactly what it looked like to scale, and then he and his assistants would put the drawing down on a piece of felt, probably, and with needles. They'd go through and they'd poke holes along all the lines, and then you have to actually flip the paper and sand all the little hanging bits off, otherwise the holes will just seal up. That's where the pouncing machine has the advantage, because it just burns a hole straight through. And then you put the piece of paper up against the wet plaster, and then take charcoal powder, put it through, and you have a dotted line.
So like you were saying previously, like, the art techniques of today are basically just reformed from the past. So that's like one of the examples. I found that fascinating. Like, it hasn't really changed, you were saying. I'm like, no way.
So when you're doing the pouncing, like, you have to make sure you have a couple days, like, with, like, weather. Would
Yeah.
that wash it away? So all that hard work you just did? Or do
No.
you just do it in sections?
So luckily the graphite powder is pretty hydrophobic. So even with the heavy rain, the line will still be there. So for the bagpiper, because there was so much little detail on him, so he's got like a hat pin that's like I mean, the whole fucking thing just has so many little details. So what I did for that was, once the pounce lines were up, I went back with a pencil and I just redrew the entire thing again.
Boy.
Because once you have, like, draw a pencil on a wall, I mean, unless you come actively with an eraser, that pencil line is there forever. It will not fade. So I have a buddy of mine in LA who's actually a second generation muralist, which is crazy. But he was telling me, he's the one that taught me how to pounce. And I asked him, I was like, hey, should we, like, worry about rain? And he's like, graphite is so resilient in rain. He said the rain actually kind of locks it into the wall. And he said he's been at one of his dad's, like, old murals that he painted 30 years ago, and the pencil line's still there. If you get up on a lift and you get close enough, he's like, the pencil line, unless you actively erase it off the wall, it's there. Like, think about what a cave drawing is, right? Cave drawing is just loose pigment that's been smeared or, like, spit onto a wall. That's it. They didn't use binder. They didn't have, like, acrylic or anything. Like,
Yeah, the sealant to
That's-
Yeah.
throw on after.
That's so impressive that it just sticks.
yeah. Well, what they did is they just found walls where it never got rained on.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
'cause
then-
it just never...
And it just preserved it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, that's so cool. So, like, when you're doing, like you said earlier, when they pounce these 9 stories, what is one of your biggest projects? Like, is there something too big that you just turned down? You're like, this is too much.
No, not yet. So this one's in terms of, like, doing my own designs and doing figurative work, this is by far the biggest project I've done. So this one is 12,500 square feet. So it's like, one wall is about 7,000, one wall is about 5,000. In terms of the largest square footage, in 2019 or 2020, my wife and I did the inside of a Nike distribution factory, warehouse in Ontario, California,
I was looking at it, it's pretty.
where they gave us all the graphics. So it was a production job. So I didn't create anything, but it was about 100% kind of translation of just their graphics, their logos and stuff. And that was probably 23,000 square feet total. I mean, they had us all over that warehouse, and that thing was 1,000 by 600. The footprint,
I don't know
1,000
if I
feet.
can comprehend on how big this
Yeah,
is
so
compared
600,000 square feet of space inside there. I mean, it's
That's
just
phenomenal.
Was it just you and your wife doing it then, or were there other artists collaborating?
So basically, they started out with 3 different paint crews, and it was me and my wife were one crew, and then there were 2 other crews, and then that first weekend, Nike inspector came in, and she basically put pieces of blue tape over all the areas that she wanted repainted. And we got the least amount of blue tape, so they fired the other 2 crews and just had us. And then they
business.
kept one girl from the other crew, so there were 3 of us. So the 3 of us just
Take the rest out.
basically the entire warehouse. It was crazy.
How long was that project then?
Off and on about 3 months.
I can't even draw on a piece of paper.
Yes, you can.
And I literally sit there looking at this. For anybody out there who's trying to get into this, like, what steps would you recommend?
I mean, as much as I loved art school and as much as I was totally shaped by my experience there, I just don't think the value proposition is there anymore because of how expensive they are. It's kind of obscene too that art schools are more expensive than even, like, other, like, high-end liberal arts colleges. Like, they're up there with the top 5, top 10 most expensive colleges in the country, and yet they're offering degrees in areas that, I mean, you can't support that kind of a loan because you could get a ceramics degree. Like, how are you going to? You need a job that pays you $200,000 a year to pay off a $50,000 loan in the the time that it takes. And so I would say there's so much information now between YouTube and just Googling stuff that, like, anything that you want to learn at this point, you could probably piece it together from different social media and online sources, and then maybe even try to find, like, especially when you're younger, one of the things you have to offer is energy. And so find someone, work for them for free, like do the literal apprentice thing. That's how it used to work. Is you'd find an artist that was really great and you wanted to emulate them, and then you would apprentice, and apprenticing meant you do all jobs for like a year, and you're just mopping and cleaning brushes and doing all the menial stuff. And then if you're smart, then while you're doing that, you're paying attention to everything that's going on in that studio, and you're learning how things run. And then if you prove yourself to be competent at the menial, simple tasks, then you get handed more complicated ones, and then eventually you learn what you want to learn. And during that time, you're not paying $1,500 an hour or whatever the hell it is that colleges cost these days. That, like, I mean, I honestly am so thankful for the timing that I had, where when I was going to RISD, it was reasonable still to go there. It wasn't an arm and a leg. And thank God, because I don't know if I would have been able to survive after I graduated if I had been carrying that large of a loan. And, there's two industries in America that are kind of guilty of the same thing, which is higher education and healthcare, right? And so the thing that they've done over the past 2 decades is they've escalated cost without offering anything more, right? So a college degree, you're not getting 12 times as educated as I was getting when I got my degree in 96, right? It cost 12 times more. You're not getting 12 times the education, right? You're not
Same
getting
4 years.
You're not getting 14 times the health care that you were getting in 2001, like, but it costs that much more now. Like, so the issue is that there's this weird incentive structure that's been set up in both healthcare and universities, right? Healthcare, it's the insurance companies; universities, it's the federally guaranteed student loans. Unfortunately, what that did is it was supposed to be an opportunity for people to go to college. But colleges saw that and they were like, holy shit, guaranteed money? Let's get as many students as we can. How do you get students? Amenities, right? And so what happened is, like, you slowly saw this turn where the whole higher educational system went from a learning student model to a consumer model. They started treating students like customers, right?
That is for sure. Like, with this whole technology advancement with like learning and this and that, I just see this huge shift into everything becoming consumer to a point. No matter what field, what industry, it's just everything slowly adapting to fit the consumer's interest.
Yeah, I mean,
I can't believe colleges, like you're saying, it's becoming that. Which is
yeah, there's a professor, NYU professor named Scott Galloway. He's got a great podcast called the Prof G Podcast. But he rails on this all the time, and every time he speaks about this, he's like, I'm probably going to get fired for saying this, but, universities and university professors have lost the plot. Like, we've literally forgotten what the we're supposed to be doing for the community. Like, you have, he calls Harvard, like, Harvard is no longer a college. It is a hedge fund that has a college attached to it, whose only job is to educate the children of its clients. That's it, right? And they're a land grant university, right? Their whole ground was given to them by the government under the agreement that they would be a public service. And yet they've become these luxury brands. Like, Scott Galloway always compares them to Hermes. They're like, they take pride in their rejection rate, right?
Yeah,
and it's like
that's what it's known for. It's
the
just like
acceptance rate is so low.
like, oh, we
Exactly.
are
and then
prestigious.
they jack the prices up.
Yes.
So even if you can get in, it's an arm and a leg.
And yet
More
with
than that.
digital dissemination techniques, like, they could raise their student class by an order of magnitude and still offer the same level of education, same level of information, but they don't, because they've lost their mission, what their mission was, and now they've turned into a luxury brand, right? Something that's coveted. And unfortunately, that's kind of like, I've kind of been watching American culture slide towards materialism for the last 30 years, even more so than, like, when I was growing up in the 80s, there was kind of a shame around the accumulation of too much money. You had to kind of justify why you were a billionaire. You had to justify, like, why do you deserve to have this much? Like, why shouldn't you be paying your fair share? Kind of an attitude.
Yeah.
And then there was a show in the 80s, late 80s, called Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous. And that's when they really started to fetishize affluent culture. That was the first show where it was like, get a glimpse behind the stars and how they live, and oh my God, look at their private jets and all this stuff. And you started to see kind of a letting go of that shame. Like, when you think about the old robber barons, right? Like the Rockefellers and the J. Paul Gettys and stuff. Back then, there was almost a responsibility that you had when you made that much money to give back massively to the public. You built museums, you built parks, you built giant public institutions that had your name slapped on it, but that was kind of like the deal.
The expected of the individual.
Yeah, and they would compete with each other to see who could give more lavishly, who could create a better, bigger park, a better library, a better museum, right? They saw that as their responsibility. What do our billionaires do? They build big-shaped rockets that compete with each other, and they just fucking literally burning fuel, burning hundreds of millions of dollars.
Just because they can.
Yeah.
Just for their fucking egos to be like, I'm gonna have people on Mars. No, you're not. Please.
We're gonna
gosh.
launch a nuclear bomb up into space, and we're gonna make an atmosphere.
Yeah, it's like we've, as a country, I've been seeing this kind of trend, and there've been a lot of writers who've talked about this as well. There's a guy named Johan Hari, who did a lot of research on, like, addiction and sort of like the cultural sort of aspects of addiction, because one of the things he found was that our addiction models are completely wrong, and they're based on a small series of rat studies that were done in, like, the 1960s, where they basically just locked these rats into a steel cage with nothing to do, and then they gave them cocaine water, and surprise, surprise, the rats drank the cocaine water till they died. Because what else would you do in a 5-by-5-foot cell with nothing? And then based on that, they were like, oh my God, these drugs, they turn a switch in your brain, and then you just take it until you die, and it has that kind of grip on you. And everything that we've done as a society to kind of deal with drugs has been based on that idea of the biological triggers in your brain.
But if there's nothing else around, then what else?
It's a faulty study.
So then I think it was in the
Didn't they also
80s.
put cocaine in, like, near this time?
Well-
Like, they were putting cocaine in coke and, like, other.
Well,
other...
that was much earlier. That was
Okay.
way earlier.
I didn't know the timeline with that. I just knew that did happen, and they
Yeah.
were also putting in other like that drug. It
Oh,
was
yeah.
used in other comedies, and people were like, "Yo, this is bad." And then they
Mhm.
slowly, like, other brands fell out, and then Coca-Cola was one of the ones that stayed around.
Yeah, and they still use coca plants for medical stuff. So, like, all lidocaines and numbing agents, those are all made from coca leaves. And Coca-Cola, I think, is one of the only American companies that's still allowed to import coca leaves, but they get them once all the drugs have been taken out of them, because they still use them for the flavoring.
I had no idea.
Yeah.
That's a cool fact.
That's a really cool fact. I'm impressed by all these facts.
So reeling it back to RISD again, you went there for 4 years?
Yeah.
Okay, and your major was?
Illustration.
Did you have any other major before? Like, was that like what you were set on?
No, I mean, before I got to RISD, I thought I was going to become a painting major, because I had kind of decided, like, once I realized I was going to go to art school, so to kind of rewind it a little bit, when I was in middle school, I got really into Michelangelo, because my parents had this, a series of these big Korean books that were all like religious textbooks. I don't know what the hell they said that in them, but they had these amazing dust jackets. And the dust jackets were, you know, like the book covers. It was a different piece of the Sistine Chapel. And I used to like come home from school and I'd take the dust jackets off and just like lay them on the floor and just look at them because I'm like, holy shit, like this is.
They matched up with like, did they like?
No.
Okay, I thought it was like
yeah.
they would make a huge like.
You know,
like
maybe they
that's-
did. I never. I don't think I knew the structure of the Sistine Chapel well enough to see if they would match up. But anyway, it just got me really into like Renaissance art, and then when I learned about Leonardo da Vinci and all the stuff they had to do with like sneaking into morgues to study anatomy, like because at the time cutting open a human cadaver was like a huge crime against the church, and you could be excommunicated and like put in jail for it. And so
I took a Renaissance class and I didn't even know that they snuck in to do this. 'Cause
Yeah.
I just figured like, oh, it would just be like modeling. And
at the time, human dissection, they didn't do that. And so the only anatomy books that they had were written by this guy named Galen, and he based his assumptions about human anatomy on animal anatomy. So he would do comparative stuff and kind of extrapolate. Anyway, so once I kind of got into Renaissance art, and then when I realized very late my junior year that I was going to go to art school, I knew, I was like, you know what, I'm going to go, and no matter what happens, I'm going to try and recreate for myself a Renaissance kind of classical education, if I can. And so I got to RISD, and freshman foundation was amazing, because it's like, so no matter what major you are, everyone takes the same freshman year. So it's 3 studio classes, figure drawing, 2D design, and 3D design. And then you take a couple of electives in history and whatever. Then at the end of your freshman year, you pick a major. So end of freshman year comes around, I'm like, okay, I'm going to become a painting major because I want to become a painter. And then I went to the painting department. So this was 1992. So postmodern abstract expressionist art had taken over all art schools. And when I went to the painting department, there was not a single person doing figurative work. It was all trash bags stapled to the wall and people dipping tennis balls into paint and throwing them. Like, it was just the kind of crap that makes regular people angry at art and artists.
$40,000.
Yeah, exactly,
I'll take
exactly.
it, I'll take it.
Like when there was someone, I saw a video once recently of someone who took their shoe off and just placed it in the
Yes.
museum, and people started
Yes.
taking photos, and it was just someone's shoe on the ground.
Yep.
And it's I think it's cool how people can like apply meaning to it, but to some extent too, I'm like, but what is this? Like,
Well,
anyone can also do this.
Exactly. So the thing that angers people is the fact. So what do all people say when they see like most modern art? They go, "Oh, I could do that." Right? And so that's meant as an insult, right? That's meant as a, like, I'm diminishing what this is trying to say by declaring that I could also fabricate this. What people are basically saying is that this object is so simply devised that I've immediately reverse engineered it, and I could recreate it in my living room if I wanted to, right? That diminishes a piece of art, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So I learned this amazing thing from one of my professors, which was that the best pieces of art have it within them a sense of ambiguity and a sense of mystery. And the ambiguity is like, what exactly does this mean? What is it trying to say? You know, it's not all one way, it's not all the other way. And what that does is it allows the viewer to bring themselves into the decision, because they're ultimately coming up to a conclusion of what it means. And sense of mystery is really about the technique. It's like, how did they do that? Oh my God, this is like, how did they do that? I know for me, the pieces of art that inspire me the most are the ones that create that sense of mystery for me, where I can't immediately reverse engineer it, and it's not so simple that I can encompass it in one view so that I never have to see it again.
So what my teacher was telling me, I'm in philosophy, like I'm taking courses at the U at the moment, and I'm like, I fell in love with philosophy. I don't know what it was, but I'm now declaring a major in it. And the head of the department, he was telling us in class that Plato, in the way he writes, he always like led the reader in a circle all the way down to like the middle, and it would never get to the point. There would always be like a sense of ambiguity, like you're saying. It would never get to the point. It would have the reader declare that this is where you're supposed to, like, this is what you're supposed to think, and like you find it out for yourself. That's all Plato's works is.
Exactly.
It's so cool.
I mean, all good teachers, well, not all great teachers will kind of let you come to the conclusion by yourself. They're not going to force it. They're going to give you all the information you need, and then they're going to wait patiently while you absorb it, and then you come to that conclusion, because it's so much more powerful than having
rewarding.
Yeah.
At the end, you're just sitting there like, I did it.
Mm-hmm.
I took symbolic logic. Literally what happened. He gave us the resources. I sat there night and day just sitting there just plotting it for this class.
Yeah.
And it came to fruition. I did it, and I was exhilarated. I was so happy.
Yeah.
Like, it changed me, for sure.
That's great.
So when I was on your Instagram and I was scrolling through the page, and it's beautiful on there. I'm looking at all this
I've
stuff.
also done some scrolling. I was like,
I'm like looking at this stuff, and I'm like, how is this even possible to even like portray? Like, now that you talked about pouncing, like, I mean, it is nice, but you still have to design some of, like, you design most of it, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And other than like what, Nike and then some of the other projects, I'm assuming, but
Yeah, I mean, I think Nike's the only production job that I was able to post. I've done a good amount of work for private clients, but that stuff I'm never allowed to post.
Yeah.
But yeah, for the most part, the stuff on my page is stuff that I designed.
and then it's just so unique because you go from having like one certain particular theme to one, and then to another, it's like, let's say one's kind of like a little bit more cartoon,
Mhm.
and then you have a little bit like realism, like the one down there, like you were just talking about the flower. I'm blanking out on the name, but the flowers.
Black-eyed Susan.
Yes,
Yep.
and it's so like you look at it and it's almost as if it's like coming out of the wall, and it's like it's so surreal to look at stuff like how you can just change it. Like, is there, like, I don't know. It's kind of like I did magic when I was really young,
Mhm.
and it's kind of like so many card tricks, and then you kind of like mix and match. Like, when you're like doing a realism, do you ever find yourself like, oh, this is a little bit more like you wanted it a little bit more real, but it's like you're not giving it out that day. Does that make sense? Like, how?
Yeah, I mean,
Since you know how to do the two, do you ever like, does it ever combine by accident and you just got to redo it?
I think I know what you're saying. There's definitely like
My head's spinning right now.
like every piece will bring a new challenge, and the thing that I've been doing for the last couple of years is kind of scaring myself with detail. So like when I was putting this piece together, like when you're pouncing, that you have the entire design on like hundreds of rolls of paper to scale, and so you're just it takes about 50 hours to pounce each sign. And so when you're doing that, you're going like, okay, am I really gonna paint all of this? Like, this is so like on the outbound lane, the girl in the swimming in the lake, all the bubbles, and when I was tracing the bubbles, I'm like, this is a lot of bubbles, like,
Very
and
genius.
I love the detail of that one. That one is absolutely insane.
oh, thank you. But
I love the skiing, by the way. That's my favorite.
that one, I actually underestimated. I thought that was going to be a little bit faster than the swimming girl,
Really?
but it ended up, I think, taking a little bit longer because
The snow just
the,
in the air.
the snow was, I was like, wow, this is taking longer than I thought. But the thing was, like, one thing that I've kind of realized going through sort of my artistic kind of path is that you have to identify the things that scare you and then move towards them. And you have to constantly like challenge yourself on that. So don't shrink from it, because there's all kinds of stuff that like your brain just goes, no, I can't do that. And it's like, look, if you are studying neurosurgery, then probably listen to that voice, because you need to get you need to feel like I can definitely do that surgery before you open up someone's brain and do surgery. But if you're doing art, there's no consequences to messing up besides a ding to your reputation and you've wasted some material, right?
Or you can get kicked out of a Nike factory.
Yeah, that's true. That's
Could
true. Look,
happen.
reputational damage is a real thing, but I read this book called The Talent Code. It's actually funny because it talks about how certain types of deliberate practice will help wrap myelin around synapses faster than other types of practice.
I'd definitely like to check that out.
Oh, it's a cool book. One of the things they were saying is that people that are in like kind of the top of their field, they are constantly in a state of almost failure, because the idea is that you take your your bundle of skills, whatever your expertise is in whatever field, and then you push what you're doing just to the edge, just past what you think you can do, so that now you're in the territory of like, I could fail, I could mess this completely up, and I could fail. Don't push it so far that it's unrealistic, but make sure that you're pushed past what you think you can do. And at that point, you'll know, because you're going to start sweating spontaneously, like you've just worked out, even though you're sitting still, because you're now going through an adrenalized panic response, right? And so I've just been kind of making sure that I've been doing that to myself in a lot of these projects. Like the first large-scale mural that I got just sort of randomly. It was an architect that I'd worked with. I painted a small piece for his lobby, and then a couple of years later, he asked if he could use some of my paintings to Photoshop into a presentation for a client. And I was like, yeah, sure. And then a couple of months later, he texted me and was like, hey, so I actually pitched you for the job. Let me know if this is a scale you're comfortable with. It was about 6,500 square feet. I hadn't even come close to 1,000 square feet at that point. I think my biggest piece up to that point was about 800 square feet, maybe 600, something like that. So this was like 6,400. And I luckily had already kind of made that rule for myself, which is that I'm not going to run away from stuff that scares me. And so I was like, yeah, sure, sounds good. Like, let's have a meeting soon.
I'll be there in 5.
Yeah. And then
So impressive.
And then I basically,
challenge.
for the next week, had like a nervous breakdown every day. Like, I would be like, what am I doing? Oh my God. Like, this is all going to go so wrong. Like, I have no idea what I'm doing. And you just learn. You just figure it out. And you just go, okay. Like, I know for me, it was like, okay, this isn't outside of my wheelhouse. Like, they're not asking me to speak in Spanish. Like, I know how to do this. I've just never done it to this scale and this, like this amount of detail. So it's like, okay, this is a variation on what I've been doing. So I just have to adapt. I have to cross that adaptive valley. And it's just such an important habit to pick up, professionally speaking, because what it also does is it guarantees that you're kind of like staying sharp. Which is also very important for artists, because it's easy to get complacent. It's easy to start taking compliments to heart too much. It's easy to get locked into a style that pays you.
Now, would you say that's comfortability? Because I've been having this theory for a while now, that once you get comfortable in something, like this is my own theory. I don't know if it's already done or somebody's already said it. But my thing is if you get super comfortable with something that you do,
Mm-hmm.
and you just get in the flow of a thing, and you don't want to break free from that, and you don't take on challenges anymore,
Mm-hmm.
it's the definition of comfortable.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's the end of all. Like, you just get comfortable and you just settle to where you are.
Mm-hmm. Well,
I feel it's like a
certainly the
downfall
end of
to a point.
movement. That's the end of your progress. Like, you can stay in that comfortable state. And
Like, if you only took on 600 square feet for the rest of your
Right.
life, because you're like, that's what I'm comfortable with.
Yeah.
I don't like to take any challenges on.
Yeah, exactly. I have a lot of peers that they lock into a style, and that style pays them, and so they don't deviate from that style ever again. And that's a good example of, like, you just stay in your comfort zone. And different approaches work differently for different people. And for me, I never had, in terms of like what I wanted out of art, I just always knew that I wasn't going to stick to a specific style. I just wanted to see how good I could get at this pursuit. And so wherever my curiosity was kind of like pushing me, I'm like, okay, well, that's got to be a good place, because it's related to what I want to do, and it's something I haven't done yet. So it's probably a good thing to at least investigate. And there's this historical Japanese figure named Miyamoto Musashi. I don't know if you've ever heard of him or the Book of Five Rings. This is a book that was written in the 1500s, I believe, late 1500s, or it might have been the 1700s. It was oh yeah, it was the 1700s, because it was when the entire samurai system was collapsing in Japan, because the Japanese had opened up trade to the West, and the West brought cannons and gunpowder, and the samurai were quickly phased out because the Japanese government realized, like, we can't fight anymore. Like, they just basically conquered us with one ship, and so they had to modernize, and so it left a lot of the samurai, like that. There was a whole generation of people that were training to be samurai, and basically as soon as they became of age, the entire reason for their being collapsed and disappeared. And so he was one of these guys. He was, known as a ronin, like a masterless samurai. And so he just basically made it his mission to become the best swordsman that had ever walked, the ground in Japan. And over the course of his lifetime, fought 58 duels, I believe, killed every single opponent. Halfway through his dueling career, he stopped using real swords against opponents who were using real swords and started using wooden swords. And then at the end of his life, wrote this amazing book called The Book of Five Rings, which is taught in like every business school still, because it's, there's a lot of strategy and stuff. And but like that story really, I read that book when I was in college, and it really inspired me because I was.
What was the translate like the author translated, like who was it, since it came out of Japan? Like, who'd you read it from? Because like different translations have like they kind of skew the point.
I don't remember who the translation was for that book.
I'm actually curious. That sounds phenomenal.
It's an amazing book, and it's really cool too, because at the end of it, they had pictures of his artwork, because he also did paintings and sculptures too, and he was really good, like really, really good. But he's kind of considered like a saint in Japan. But like I got a lot of inspiration from that story, because it was kind of like sword fighting was enough for him, even though his path that he was supposed to take had been taken away. And so therefore a lot of his peers probably lost their meaning. But for him, the sword fighting was the meaning. And so once he had made that decision, all the other decisions in his life probably came much easier. And I was lucky enough to kind of make a similar decision where I was like, you know what? I think I'm just going to make sure that I try to stay as true to who I want to be as an artist for as long as I can maintain that. And that gave me kind of a clear set of few set of principles that I could just sort of live by, so that anytime I was faced with a hard decision, it wouldn't be as hard, because there's only a couple of principles to kind of live by, which is, are you getting better as an artist? Are you doing it for the art, or are you doing it for the money? Just stuff like that. And it's allowed me to walk away from jobs. I've walked away from a lot of money because I didn't like the client. And looking back on that, I got an offer from Walmart at a time when my business was tanking. I was having one of the worst years as a professional, and this was a substantial amount of money, but ultimately I walked away from that job. And looking back, I'm happy with that decision. I don't wish I had taken the money. I don't wish I had done that job for Walmart. I'm actually glad that I can look back and go, oh, this does mean more to me than money. There is, and it's not to say that there's anything wrong with artists who value extrinsic motivations, right? It's kind of two different types of things that can motivate you: intrinsic and extrinsic. And so every job has both. But when you have, so there's basically three main intrinsic motivations, which is the opportunity for mastery, autonomy, and a sense of belonging to something that's bigger than you. And so if you can find those three factors in any kind of job, that becomes a passion. Whereas extrinsic motivators are things like social status, money, position, right, title, anything that allows you to share your achievements socially, right, and get props and likes and whatever. So that's extrinsic motivation. And there's really nothing wrong with extrinsic motivations. The problem is that they're not equal, right? So if you do something for an extrinsic motivation, it tends not to last as long. The effect on you is not as long. It's not as strong either. So you don't get the same emotional kind of payoff, because extrinsic motivations go away very quickly. And the money goes away fast. The likes go away. What's next? What else are you going to do to entertain us? And so you have to, it's this endless cycle, whereas intrinsic motivation builds on itself. So as I progress every year, the thing I did last year matters, because it's what I'm building this year on top of. Whereas extrinsic motivations, it's like a cocaine hit, Once it's gone,
dopamine hit.
It's
gone.
over. It's over. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then you're fighting the next high, basically.
And so the pitfall of putting your basket in the extrinsically motivated side of things is that inevitably, when you come across rough times, you're going to actually need a lot of motivation to stay in the pocket of uncomfortable uncertainty, uncomfortable feelings, stress, things like that. And so intrinsic motivations tend to root you deeper into what you're doing, and so you're not going to give up as quickly. Whereas if you're extrinsically motivated, if you're just in it for the money, well, when things get hard, you go, well, how else can I make money? And then you find that next thing that can make money. And why the hell would you stay in art if you're not making money at it anymore, if that's your motivation? And so that's part of the reason why you see high achievers in like the arts and fields like that they tend to be intrinsically motivated, is that the intrinsically motivated tend to just ride out the storm a little bit better than the extrinsically motivated do.
With your career, like what you were just saying, like the money and all that, like when you're not doing a good year, like how do you motivate yourself? Like it seems like, is it consistent?
It has been for the last couple of years. It's actually been really good. Ironically, I had my toughest year in 2019, right before the pandemic. So that once the shutdown happened, I was fine, because we had already downsized and just cut every extraneous thing out of our lives. And but yeah, there is a lot of uncertainty, and when things slow down, the main thing is you just have to, again, you have to have certain kind of principles. And so like one thing is you have to like look at what your practice is, right? So when things slow down, you go, okay, well, what am I doing? And you take it kind of an audit of what your practice is. And if you can find something that's lacking, or something that maybe you should be doing that you're not doing, then good, you have like a plan of action. If you do an audit and you find that there's nothing lacking, then you have to actually just have faith that you're moving in the right direction, and that this is just a bit of bad luck that will eventually turn around, as long as you are still producing what you can produce to the highest quality. And at that point, like, I just went off on a different tangent artistically. So like when murals started slowing down, I got really into paper craft for a while, and I was making these masks, and I actually had this whole plan to create patterns and start selling the patterns just on Etsy, because that's a great thing to try to make money with, because you're just selling bits of information. There's no inventory to keep track of. Once the design is done, you just sell that design over and over again. It doesn't cost any more to sell 1,000 than it does to sell one. And so, you find ways to kind of redirect your energy, and, I could see, oh, maybe this might become like a moneymaker. And then obviously once things started to open back up after the pandemic, then the mural work started coming back. Like I said, once that pent-up demand started happening, came back strong, and then I had to put all of that stuff to the side, and I haven't looked back since. So, but yeah, those tough years that's when you question everything, and that's when the extrinsically motivated tend to bounce, and the intrinsically motivated kind of sit in the pocket of discomfort.
So coming from like another fellow artist, I've always been very in tune with detail, very like focused with detail.
Mm-hmm.
But how do you get to a point like where you're like, oh, like, this is done? Because I know for other artists, like, you can overwork a piece,
Yep.
or I would say, for me at least, I'm a perfectionist. I don't know if it's the same for other artists. I would like to say the same, but I don't want to like generalize it too much.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess I understand that you can always put more time into something. I think that for me, it's like when I look at something, there's like a glance where you can tell that everything's in its right spot and that there's nothing that's not shaded incorrectly. So there's this concept that Malcolm Gladwell wrote about in his book Blink, and it's basically that if you have built up expertise in any field, right, and you've spent 20, 30 years doing this one thing, and you have now built up your neural pathways to the point where they're covered in so much myelin that they run so efficiently and so quickly that if you're now faced with some sort of decision about something within that field, your split second just gut decision is actually going to be more accurate and draw from a much wider cross section of your brain than if you take that same decision, parse it out on a pro and con list, and trying to figure out through writing down what your problems are, whatever. That's going to be actually less accurate because now you're taking all of that expertise and you're funneling it through your linguistic center, which throttles everything, and you're not drawing from that same cross-section of brain anymore because that activity, you've done it so much and it's laid down so many neural pathways that branch into different parts of your brain that that split-second decision is now going to be so much more informed than anything that you could sort of like agonize out and like through lists and just through like talking it out. And so he covered this in that book and covers it across different fields, and it's fascinating. Like there's a couples therapist he takes videos of couples arguing, and then he looks for micro expressions of contempt, and he can tell with a 98% accuracy if they're going to be divorced within 3 years. There's a tennis coach named Vic Braden who just accidentally realized when he's watching tennis matches that if a player faults on the first serve, he can tell with like a 95% accuracy whether or not they're going to double fault. And it was a fact that like creeped him out. He didn't know what he said it during like one afternoon he was watching with friends. Oh, they're going to double fault. They double faulted. Then he did it again and again and again. He kept predicting accurately. And it just kept him up at night. He couldn't figure out how he was doing it. And when people would ask him to describe it, he couldn't describe it because it's outside of language. Because it's drawing on so much that it's beyond your powers of description, which is why when you put it into a list, it diminishes that wisdom. So I've developed that for sure. Mm-hmm. And when I look at one of my pieces, I go, oh, that's wrong.
Yeah.
And oh, that's wrong. And basically, as soon as I look at it and I can't find anything wrong with it, it's done.
A big part of that is just doing it over and over again, like learning and building up your knowledge and just figuring out like where you made that mistake and just learning from it.
Tens of thousands of hours of repetition. So I think it's that another Gladwell concept,
10,000 hour rule.
We all read the book in high
school.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
10,000 hours to become an expert at it.
Well, and you have to caveat that with 10,000 hours of deliberate practice. Mm-hmm. So deliberate practice is very different from normal practice, right? So in the Talent Code, I think Terrence Coyle is the author of that one. Mm-hmm. He describes deliberate practice as basically the visual is imagine somebody in really heavy boots climbing up a snowy hill and really struggling and then slipping and falling back down and then struggling to get back up and sliding back down. That's how deliberate practice feels. It's not a flow state. It's not comfortable. It sucks. It's what bounces most people out of most, arts and, professions and things like that is that moment where they go, ooh, I don't like how this feels. And then they go, no more, I don't want to do it anymore.
Reminds me of Orgo.
Wow, it was something.
It was something.
So when they get into that state and like that's what drops them out, like how does one get, I don't know, like how does one practice deliberately, I guess you could say, like how
to
I don't
stay
know.
Motivated is
well,
what
no,
you're asking?
I know we talked about it. I'm just trying to think of how
like
to
a
word
schedule
it.
for it?
Not like a schedule. Because I remember when I read the book when he mentioned the 10,000 hour rule,
Mm-hmm.
and he started. But I also read it a while ago. I remember him saying something about flow state, I think,
Mm-hmm.
and you just said that the flow state's a little bit different because it's just like if I were to do the same thing every single day and I'm doing it over and over and over, it's not really doing that mastery.
Yep, that's exactly right.
So, like the difference between a flow state, like at least like to an artist, like what you did, I'm just trying to connect it in my head, so I'm just saying it out loud.
Flow state is very different from deliberate practice, because a flow state is going to be like when you're implementing your practice.
Okay.
That's flow state. So like when I'm up on that wall and I'm painting, I'm in a flow state. Like a 10-hour day just goes by like that. I mean, I'm seriously like, holy, it's already 7 o'clock. Like
It's dark out.
like
Come
the
on, man.
flow
I was
state
just getting
is
started.
unique because days just fly by. I mean, they really do. You lose all track of time.
Okay.
Deliberate practice is almost the opposite of that. It's like you feel every minute.
Every minute's ticking by, and you're like
Because
looking.
you're sweating. You're literally sweating from the mental exertion of trying to do. Like, I can remember being in figure drawing classes and just sweating like I was running on a treadmill, because I'm trying to focus and I'm trying to figure out, and I know my drawing looks like shit, and like there's no denying it, because like you know enough to know if something's good or bad, right? You still don't know enough to make it good, but you at least know enough to know that what you're doing is bad. And there's another thing that we always would do is during every break, everybody goes and they walk around everyone else is drawing,
No.
and no one ever says anything.
I have a question though. Did your professor or like the person, like whoever was teaching you guys that class, did they put the artworks up at the end of the class and I guess
Critique them.
critiques? Yeah, critique.
Yep. We had a lot of critiques as well, and so you do develop a thick skin. Crits were a huge part of life at RISD, and basically at the end of every project, you would put everyone's project up on the wall, and then everyone would just rip each other apart. And,
I lost some friends those days, huh?
yeah.
I knew you next week. I don't know you now.
Yeah, and it was never malicious. There was never like, oh,
Yeah.
this looks like you're a piece of.
Well,
But
It feels like it though.
also it'd be somewhat anonymous, right? Like you
No.
would know.
no, it's
Well,
in
'cause-
front of everyone, and you're doing it because
Yeah.
everyone in class, they put their thing up on the wall, and then you sit in a big semicircle, and then you get up and you go, well,
Did you ever critique your own though?
No, you never critiqued your own, and you never did like a presentation or anything. It was always just like, the teacher would say, well, what do we think about this one, or what do we think about this one? She might point out ones that she thought kind of hit the assignment, or maybe point out ones that might have missed it, and then try to see what the feedback was. I tended to be kind of a cruel art snob. I didn't make many friends when I was in art school, but but it did keep me sharp, because I'm like, putting a target on my back. So I had to make sure that I was a high performer in order to maintain that level of criticism for everyone else.
Yeah.
Well, so with the mural you're doing in downtown, or almost close to downtown, it involves like realism and then clip art. But you said that you don't have a specific style that you kind of stick to, and you kind of like all styles. But when you were in art school, like were you always doing more realistic stuff?
Yeah, when I was in art school, I again focused 100% on direct observational, mostly figure drawing and figure painting. And then I also took a whole series of anatomy classes, which that was another crazy story. Basically, there was a professor from Brown University who was an anatomy professor for med students, came out of retirement because he got bored at like 74, came down to RISD and asked a bunch of art students if they'd be interested in anatomy for artist classes. And he got such a huge response that he started a class at Brown, because Brown and RISD are sister schools, basically. And so you can cross-register and stuff. And so we were in the Brown Med building sharing a cadaver with one of the med classes.
Incredible.
And then I became his TA the next year, so I basically retook the whole class over again, and this time, it was my job to like make sure the cadaver was like cleaned up, and like cleaning up the dead animals when we were done dissecting, and it was crazy. It was such a an amazing opportunity, and it was only like literally a window of like 3 or 4 years that he taught those classes.
Did you ever do research with like a professor there? By chance?
No.
So you said you're a TA though, so
Yeah.
that's very involved with the professor themselves. But
Well, not just that, but it gave me an opportunity to sit through all the lectures over again. And so I took the class, you know, it was like the beginning and then advanced, and then I was a TA for both classes, so I got to hear both sets of lectures over again, and that was huge because it really locked everything in to, you know, the long-term memory. So with surgeons, before I think like the 1900s, all surgeons were trained artists. So they were trained in how to draw stuff from direct observation, because there's something about trying to draw something where you're going to actually observe that thing more comprehensively than if you were to try to look at it and write down a description of it, or there's no other way that you observe something as thoroughly as if you're looking at it to try and copy it down in a two-dimensional form. And so it's just the way, it's like a deep observation. So you're getting like stuff that you can't describe even, because it's going past your verbal centers. It's kind of...
So you're necessarily like, you're getting more out of it essentially? Like your brain is like what I'm getting from this is like with the anatomy is like you're drawing it, you know where the structures are because you drew it and it's helping you understand it. Is that kind of what that does?
Yep.
That is so, and it's so crazy how that works like that, because it's like, it's actually not 3D, it's 2D, and you're like writing it down, but you can put as much detail in it as possible. And then, like, you start to build that relationship.
It's density of information because, you know, what's that saying? A picture is worth 1,000 words. So, you know, you have to write down so much in order to convey what you can with just a sketch. And so the idea being that, like, if you really get into direct observational drawing and painting, you know, you are just dissecting things visually. And once you get into the practice of that, you start to look at things differently. You'll analyze colors differently. You analyze shapes differently. And you do it automatically because now there's a big part of your brain that's kind of running on autopilot because you've done these things over and over again so much that it just, those neural pathways are now highways, and they're just so wide, so much signal travels up and down them.
I think it's in a textbook. It's just a picture that you see, and like, this is what you're supposed to memorize, know what's here, what's there. This is what you have to learn. It's not like
robotic.
It's not 3D. Like, this is like, you'll learn that later most likely, but that's so, I don't even know a word, like robust. And I had another thought that went with that, but I slipped my mind.
Boomerang it.
Yeah, bring it back later.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. This is kind of like, it was brought up previously, but it was just a good question. And so when you get in the flow state, when you're just doing these drawings, all right, what takes you out of that flow state? Is it when you like design them? Like how? Because you know that, like, I don't know how to say it. I'll just...
What do you mean interrupts the flow state?
Yeah, so like to get that 10,000 hours to try to become like, you probably have way more than 10,000 hours of this.
Yeah, at this point.
At this point you're not really too worried about it. But like when you were starting up, all right, and like you were just going through the flow state, what would put you in the state where you're actually doing the 10,000 hours and not just the I'm repeating this process?
Oh yeah, the deliberate practice side of it. I mean, it helps to have a mentor.
Okay.
It helps to have teachers. It helps to know that those teachers are guiding you in the right direction. So I ended up doing a good amount of research on professors when I was a freshman. That's what led me to illustration. I was like, is there anyone in this school that's actually doing like figurative work? Because this is not what I want to learn. Like when I went to the painting department, I'm like, this is not what I want to learn. And so ensuring that you have the right professors, that's a huge part of it. And then just doing what they tell you to do. Like you
start from the bottom and then you learn what they do, and
just
then
assume you don't know anything because you really don't, and assume that they are professionals and take in everything that you can. And obviously if they're bullshitting you, then hopefully you can weed that out. But usually if you've done a good enough job of vetting the professors and the courses that as much as is in your control, then it's just about trusting what they're teaching you and then trying to take in as much of that information as you possibly can. And, you know, like, that's not going to be flow state. That's going to be challenging. That's going to be stuff that requires a lot of focus, and a lot of mental discipline, a lot of grit. You know, like
Yeah.
the idea of grit. You know, in terms of like what I did personally in art school. So RISD has this amazing. They call it the Nature Lab, and it's this huge resource. They have something like 100,000 different specimens of from shells and bone fragments to human skeletons and like whale vertebra and taxidermied animals and stuff, and you can check things out. And so
It's like a big warehouse of just.
it's the bottom floor of the Freshman Foundation building. It's this old building that was built in like the 1800s, and but it's just amazing. And like I spent hundreds of hours in the nature lab just drawing skeletons, just drawing spinal columns and rib cages and stuff. And it's like that's the deliberate practice where you know what it's supposed to look like because it's right in front of you.
Yeah.
And that's one of the amazing things about figurative drawing, like direct observational drawing. And the reason why you can build on something is because there's an objective standard, and that objective standard is sitting right in front of you. So if you've gotten it exactly, you can tell. Other people can tell, right? Mm-hmm. And then that's the other thing too that's cool about and inclusive about realistic art is you don't have to be an expert to know someone messed up, right? You don't have to know anatomy to know someone can't draw hands. You just have to look at it and go,
It doesn't look right.
Yeah. Right?
Like they're missing a finger.
And so
Added a figure. That's me.
I think that's why figurative art is still so popular and will always be popular with non-artistic people even, is because there is an objective standard that everybody agrees to because it's just reality. And so you can tell if someone has hit that objective standard or if they've missed. And in that way, you can also participate. Even though you're a non-artist or whatever, you don't know anything about art, you can still say, wow, like that is an amazing, like, that's the thing about beauty, is it compels attention. You don't want to stop looking at it, right? And then that's the thing about mistakes, is like and stuff like that. If someone does a Napoleon Dynamite style portrait, like you can tell, like, okay, that person needs to practice a little bit more. You don't have to know anything about art to be able to make that judgment. And so I think that's why people are attracted to that style of art. Whereas I think that the opposite, when you have a lot of postmodern expressionist stuff, people feel like they can't participate because they don't understand why this thing is worth $120,000, and it makes them feel stupid, and it makes them feel excluded, and that's actually by design, right? So there's a whole theory around abstract art that it's actually a plot to kind of disenfranchise the average person from art and artistic expression, because it was such a dangerous form of expression during the Great Depression and into the New Deal, when workers were kind of striking for rights and labor practices were being reformed. So there was basically like a whole contingent of elites that didn't want to go along with FDR and the New Deal. And so they started trying to figure out ideological ways to kind of carve back their position in society. So one of the big things they started doing was they started to fund right-wing evangelical preachers and ministers in the Deep South. And they created what's called the prosperity gospel, which is this idea that, no, don't listen to Jesus when he says that a rich man cannot get into heaven, or, as the verse goes, a camel could pass through the eye of a needle before a rich man gets into heaven, right? So this new gospel, which was basically created by corporations in the 1940s, is if you're rich, then it means God is smiling on you, so you must be doing something right. If you're poor, then it means you're sinning in some fundamental way that's making God mad at you. Yeah. And so rich equals good, poor equals bad, right? So it's a complete perversion of... but then as this theory goes, another thing that they did to try and create this ideological separation between like the average person and like rich people was that they started funding abstract work, abstract art. And there's a lot of declassified CIA documents that describe this. In the 1950s, when we were fighting the Cold War, there was a political component to it and a cultural component. And at the time, the Soviets had some of the best figurative painters in the world. working, and so did the communist Chinese. And so, as a counterpoint to that, the CIA started funding abstract artists. So Mark Rothko and Jackson Pollock and like William de Kooning. They used a beard. They found the scion of some blue-blooded family in New York, and they would funnel him money, and then he would put on these exhibitions in like Tokyo and Paris and Rome and London, just bringing out these artists that literally painted like children. And so the idea was like, no, our art is better than your art. You know, like your art is stiff and it's
Wow.
academic. Our art
I didn't
is...
even hear about this ever.
Yeah, I didn't know it was like that in depth.
So if it hadn't been for the CIA funding these worldwide exhibitions, I really don't think American abstract art would be nearly as big as it is today. Whereas literally the most expensive paintings in the world are this genre of work, and it was all just kind of like I don't know, like it was a psyop.
Yeah.
So then, for artists who have like that specific style and I don't know, I'm trying to find the word now. Like they're very specific, or they, why am I blanking on the word?
For abstract art?
Like it's their specialty, I guess.
Yeah.
That's what I'm trying to say. It's their specialty. They work with it.
Yep.
Versus other artists where they don't really have a style, but they just kind of float around and they just are trying to be good at like every other thing.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that people want it more, like they're harder to get, and people try to hire them because of their style? Kind of like the artists who created Timmy Turner, or like people who are like say they specialize in cartoons. Their art style is very unique. Therefore, people want that artist and will hire them because of their style.
Yeah, I mean that definitely happens too. But there's pros and cons to that arrangement, because if you get known for a style and you embrace that, then now you're locked in. So you really can't ever change anymore. Like especially if, say, you're in the gallery scene and curators start taking on your work because they know that you have a following. Well, your following likes that style, and that's what they're going to expect. Curators are going to expect you to paint in that style, whether you want to or not. And so hopefully you love that style, and that's what speaks to you, and
Hopefully, because
yeah,
you're locked in after that.
exactly.
That's...
and you might get into an unfortunate position where you start to hate the thing that you're creating, and that happens. But I know what you're saying. Like that was the big debate in art school. Was more than half the kids were basically trying to find what their voice was, because they realized like, hey, I'm unique in the world, and the world is going to pay for my unique voice. So it's my job when I'm in art school to find what that unique voice is. And I was like, that voice is, I'm not going to listen to it for another 10 years, because I'm going to learn everything I can about all the technicals.
Which is so bizarre, because nowadays, like, artists are expected to have a style. Where, like, for me, like, I feel like I have a style, but it's just changed. And when I show my sketchbook to other people, they're like, oh, like, you have very many different styles. It's just because, like, I like tiptoeing, or, like, getting my toes wet, and just many different things. And people are like, oh, you just don't have a style. Whereas, like, I feel like I'm almost expected to have it. It's really bizarre.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a big push and a pressure to do it that way. I think there was some part of me that in my gut, I just understood that there was a risk of underdeveloping as an artist. If I concentrated too early on what my voice was, then I wasn't going to get the same level of technical mastery that I could. And so I just made it a choice. I just realized, like, I think it's going to be better for me to have this toolkit where I can go in any style I want to when I'm in my 20s, where then once I do figure out what my style is, nothing stops me from going in any direction that I want to, as opposed to before I even know who I am and before I even really know what my voice is, picking that direction and then sticking to that, because it's like the chances of miscalculating are much greater, I feel like, when you have less of a knowledge base to go by, and you're being influenced all the time. You're being influenced by your peers, you're being influenced by all the artists that you're learning about, and over emulation is dangerous as well. And most people don't know the second half of the phrase, imitation is the highest form of flattery. The second part of that is that mediocrity can pay to greatness. That's the complete quote. Imitation is the sincerest form of flattery that mediocrity can pay to greatness. So
he's going like a quote book.
So it really, that's Oscar Wilde. So it really changes that the tone of it. It makes imitation not quite so laudable, a thing, because it's really what it's saying is like, if you're mediocre, that's the best you can do is imitate.
Have you ever gotten into philosophy, by the way? I'm just curious.
Not directly. I mean, I'm trying to think. I've read some like philosophical type books, but they've never been straight philosophy, like philosophical theory, stuff like that. It's always been stuff like The Alchemist, or where it's a narrative that's based around philosophical ideas, or like Siddhartha, something like that.
I'm like slowly diving into it at the moment, like I was saying earlier.
Yeah.
And just like, I wish I was able to talk like how my teacher talks, and like how he gets into a topic and really just divulges it. Like, I don't know. Like, I'm very like on the surface at the moment, like trying to get. Cause I found a passion in that for some reason. I don't know what it was. Like, I'm biology, but philosophy, it just kind of captivated me. And it's just like listening to you talk. It's just like I'm just kind of like trying to use that and like think about it back and forth. It's fascinating.
I mean, one thing that really helped me a lot when I was in college, and I think I started it when I was in high school, but I really got into it when I was in college, is when I would read a book, I would keep a notebook with me and a little pocket dictionary. And anytime that I would come across a word I didn't know, I would stop, write it down, write down the definition. And then after like a week, I'd go back over and I'd look over. And it just increased my vocabulary so much. And what you realize is that all your thoughts are your words, right? You're just constantly telling the story of yourself to you. So the greater the array of words you have, the better you can tell the story to yourself.
The expression,
the more detailed. And so just simple vocabulary building
cool.
I'm taking notes right now. Mental
creates
notes.
so much down the line. It's like, what it does is it just allows you to form your thoughts more cohesively, more directly, and usually you can encompass more in more economy of words and things like that.
Wow.
So I'm in a world literature class right now where we're just talking about like translations to just having more words at your disposal.
Disposal.
Disposal, yes,
Yeah.
thank you. And what the guy was saying is so basically where you like grew up or what you did, you would define like certain things more. So like somebody who lived near towards Alaska, they have 27 different forms for the word of snow.
Right.
As rather here we have maybe 7 at most, from like slush to like icy, sleet, stuff like that. And up there they have so much more, and they just picked up on so many different more words to define and characterize like different things.
Yep.
I don't know, just
Well, that's, a lot of that is going to be like neuroplasticity as it relates to your surroundings, right? And like the brain is amazing at the ability that we have to encompass so much if we concentrate on it. And so like one example I love is, so there's a small percentage of people who are like, they basically have a vision where they can see hundreds of thousands of different shades of color, just naturally, right? And so I'm trying to remember what the podcast was. I think it was Radiolab. But they were looking at this one case. It was a woman who had this type of vision, and they would do tests where they'd have these little nuances of color, and she could always pick out like what was different. And it was fascinating because they were just talking about how her brain, it perceives these things differently, and her brain scans are in, present in a different way. But then at the end of it, they said, however, when they gave these same visual tests to artists, they had the exact same results. These artists had trained themselves to see hundreds of thousands of different shades. And so you can actually achieve that like almost savant level just through practice, just through the right type of practice and training. Now, multi-subject, that's a different story, right? That's why true polymaths are so rare. You never see the guy that just won a gold medal in the 200-yard dash and can also play the piano in a symphony orchestra. Like, those people just don't exist because it takes so long to
master.
become a master at one thing.
20 to 30 years.
Yeah,
For the
20.
most part.
Well, it reminds me of the one guy who is like, was he in the military and then he was an astronaut?
Oh God,
and
yeah, that Korean dude. Jesus Christ.
He has all
Yeah.
these like accomplishments and achievements, and it's just like, how do you do that and you're already like this young?
He went from a Navy SEAL to then graduated Harvard Medical School, and then became an astronaut.
Yep. Like, where do you find the time?
It makes me
I have
feel
no
pretty good.
No, it's
No idea.
like that guy is so dangerous for all Korean men in this country because now every mother is just going to compare their son to this guy.
He's setting the standard.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
bar is way too high.
That guy,
That's
no. That's not fair.
We actually had a photographer on that was
On a couple days ago, and
Yeah.
he was like telling us the process of him like
In a
going into
black
the
room.
Developing an
Yeah,
actual
yeah.
photo, yeah.
Yeah.
It's
How it was
insane.
and how there's no
inverted and this and
tutorials
that.
and how he had to like go through and
like to think how much it's changed and how like much resources we have now and how much is wasted because of like the consumer. Like
Yeah.
everything is just sitting there scrolling when you could be developing and like really putting your mind to something useful. It's just
Yeah.
Yeah,
fascinating.
the pace of change is what I notice the most in terms of like life in 2024 versus even life in 2000, right? Like 20 years ago.
It's
I think it's just that the technology is going so fast and we're not keeping up with the technology. So the technology is changing and progressing faster than we can even adapt to it. So for instance, like AI, right? AI has turned, in terms of art, it's turned everything upside down. I don't know if
how it's able to do that with code.
Isn't-
how it's able to
isn't
generate.
AI stealing images from artists?
technically it isn't, like
Technically.
so these generative systems are being trained on copyrighted images, but then the images that they produce, even though they might be in the style of an artist, are still unique images, right? So you could say that in order to train the AI, they had to actually steal copyrighted work, but then they're not actually generating copyrighted work. And then the other thing that's a problem right now, there's two big class action lawsuits happening, one in the UK and one in the US, over AI, these systems. A lot of artists are named in these suits. The big problem, my brother's a lawyer, so he was telling me, is that right now copyright law isn't really designed to protect artists in this way, because copyright law, it has to be about a specific piece. So the artists have to be saying it's this one piece that
you mimicked and
and now you're competing with me in market and whatever, because they won't be able to point to a specific piece that's being where their rights are being violated. Those suits might not really go that far.
But then there's also the argument that no art is ever original because it's always constantly being inspired by other artists.
This is gonna sound kind of bad, but you've watched one of our like podcasts. You saw the intro at least, right? Like the news.
Oh,
it's
yeah.
just like, well, how does it go?
In the bustling world of
That whole
communication.
video. It was a 2-minute video, AI generated, and it gave me I literally typed in a prompt like, give me a news reporter giving a speech about how podcasting's blowing up and how it's becoming such an industry. It generated a 2-minute video of like moving images and like art and people talking.
Yeah.
I'm like, they're supposedly going to be making movies with AI eventually.
Oh no, I'm sure it'll happen before 2026. Like I think it'll probably happen next year.
Yeah.
Because again, it's just the absolute speed at which this stuff is moving right now is
Gives you chills.
it's very
Just thinking
scary.
about it.
Seeing it firsthand, it's not like you're seeing it over like a time of like 10 years. You're seeing it within like 2.
Which is why for
A year.
artists, like if you're going into art right now, it's terrifying because you have no idea where it's gonna go.
Yeah.
Which is why, like, I'm not sure if I want to go into biomedical illustrations because with AI, like, AI can do what I would be supposedly doing.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Exactly.
So like that actually is a really good point.
It's
And
like creating the generation of samurai that went through and then they literally are found with no purpose.
I mean,
Same with medical doctors too. Like robots are able to perform.
these procedures.
Yeah. Like I trained, let's say, 12 years to become a cardiovascular like surgeon. A robot just took over because they're better at it because they're just natural. Like it just has.
There's a more
They're
success
programmed
rate.
to.
better success rate. And it's more mechanical.
yeah. I mean, you have a processor that can do billions of calculations a second versus a human brain. Like, who do you think is going to win? Like,
Yeah.
in terms of the cognitive ability, the processor is just going to be so much faster and better at, like, so right now a big thing in medicine that AI is taking over is radiology, right? Because you now have these AI systems that can see 50,000 shades of gray, you know, and like can tell these tiny little things that basically equal like a radiologist with 35 years experience, right? But now it's in an algorithm. And so it's right now
There's
it's
pros and cons to it too, because it's great, but then you're also taking away jobs.
yes. And God forbid something should go wrong with the system that you're now relying everything on, you're
That's
screwed.
exactly what I was thinking.
And then you restart. Then there's no teachers that teach it.
Well, because skills become lost,
Yeah.
and that's the main problem with kind of outsourcing all of it, is that if no one's around that knows how do you even know if it's working correctly if no one's around to know the difference between correct
It
and
It reminds me
incorrect?
of Wall-E.
Wally?
Like,
Yeah.
when I think about like technology just like taking another step further, I'm like, we're gonna be the people in Wall-E. Like,
Oh my
we're gonna
God.
be that civilization.
Uh-huh.
Wait, so like right now, if you were in like let's just say our shoes, and you were gonna, God forbid, go to art school, and it's expensive right now, but you have that worry of AI. Like, do you think it's kind of like a hypothetical thing? But do you think like art itself is gonna not necessarily die out, but it's gonna not be as because there's just gonna be like, oh, instead of like having an artist design a wall, like
I
a
could
mural,
just-
they're just gonna be like, oh, let's go to AI and see what they could do. Like, it has to be like startling. Like, what would be your step? And I know this is like a really loaded question to ask. But
No,
like,
I mean, look, this is something I think about all the time, because right now I happen to be in one of the only fields of art that's not directly threatened by AI, because they still haven't made a robot that can paint a wall. Right? They're working on it, I'm sure. But right now, whereas if you're an illustrator of any kind, if you're a
Animator.
graphic designer, animator, character designer, prop designer, anything like that, storyboard artist, all of that is directly threatened by AI. And
That also is directly involved with technology as well.
yeah, and happen to be some of the best paying jobs within
Yeah.
the arts that you could get. Visual arts is being one of these artists for one of these big studios. And what's basically going to happen is that the financial opportunities for artists are going to slowly go away, because what you're going to find is that the studios are going to basically cut 90% of their art staff. They're going to keep the top 10%, and they are the ones that are going to work with the AI to get what the studios want.
That's
the
why, like,
perfected piece.
if you want to work with art nowadays, it's better that you even take a comp sci major instead of an art major.
Yeah.
Like, you're better off going into technology versus art, and that's how you're going to indirectly work with it.
Yeah.
Which is why I was like, oh, I'll do bio and then do biomedical illustrations. But now with AI, it's like, is it even worth it?
And there's always going to be a market for paintings. There's always going to be a desire for human-created artwork. That's never going to go away. But what is going away rapidly are these industry jobs where you can make a very nice living doing art for a company, where you have some sort of purpose. And those kinds of like illustration jobs basically are all, again, I think what you're seeing are hybrids. It's AI generated, then given to some kind of artist to finish. And you're going to start to see that hybrid model more and more. And, I'm doing that with my stuff. Like, I have AI generated work in my murals, because I know a lot of my fellow artists, muralists, are doing the same thing. Because it used to be that you would spend a couple of hours on Google looking for licensable photographs that you could use for a reference, right? So you're going to Getty Images, you're going to these other like photo compilation sites and trying to find like, okay, I need a swimmer or whatever.
Or creating your own even.
But now with Midjourney, you can just couple of prompts. You
literally type, I want a kid jumping in the water this age, and I want the
Yep.
splash to be this way, and
And
it'll
you-
generate
yeah.
something
and
similar.
you can choose the angle, you can choose the lighting, you can choose, and you're not sitting for hours looking for that exact right pose in a photo somewhere, like,
And taking multiple and trying to recreate how you want to
yep,
see it.
In your
or
vision.
exactly. And so it's certainly changed the workflow for a lot of muralists. But again, like, part of me is like, wow, like, I feel like, so part of me, I know, with any emerging technology, you either figure out how to incorporate it in your practice or you get left behind. And so I made peace with that. But at the same time, like, I also know that I am now contributing to this issue, because it used to be I would find a photo and I would pay a photographer somewhere for a license for this photo. I'm no longer doing that. So that's money, what little money it was, it's still money that was
Yeah.
going out to other artists that now I'm using
Something else.
yeah, I'm not paying them. I'm using an AI that I'm paying $20 a month for. And so it's like I see that, and but at the same time it's a dilemma for artists, because like, it's either that or you don't use it, and then you don't know how to use it, and then if it becomes more important, then you're really stuck. And look, if they put out a petition tomorrow to say, hey, we're just gonna make this stuff all illegal, I'll sign it, but that's not going to happen, because that's not the way that technology works. The genie's out of the bottle, and it's
Once it hit the market, and it just the people had it in their hands.
Unless we have a solar flare and everything's down for a while, I mean, I don't see us going back.
yeah. That would a total reset like that would be
It'd be scary because we rely on technology for every day.
Oh yeah. I mean,
Imagine not having electricity for one day.
yeah.
And how, like, I'm talking
When the
like
power
in a
goes
phone.
out during a storm and you feel like 2 days without electricity, you're coming out of the house and you're like, I haven't showered. I haven't, because like the power was for the
Lost.
water, yeah.
No, I mean, there's a saying in, like, political science that every nation is 3 missed meals away from chaos, right? So it's
That's mine.
yeah, like, look, we live in the best time in the history of being a human being to be alive is right now, right? In terms of our technological achievements, in terms of our medical advances, not just that, but we happen to be the luckiest people within the cohort of luckiest human beings because we're American, right? And say what you want about the problems we're having in this country, there's still no better situation in this world than to be born in this country, because in terms of the opportunity that you have, in terms of the upward mobility, you're just not going to find that in any other country, right? And then obviously the diversity as well. So you take those 3 factors, and then obviously too, we're insulated from almost every global problem. Obviously COVID, that's a different thing because that can travel on airplanes and whatever. But like, we've never had a threat of invasion, right? Look what's happening in Russia right now, right? The whole reason Putin went to war in the first place is because the old Soviet Union, the present Russian Federation, they don't have any natural blockades or obstacles or mountain ranges or deserts or anything. It's just a huge open field. You can just roll an armored division through anytime you want. The whole reason why Putin is doing this expansionist stuff in the first place is he's trying to get back to these natural geographic barriers that the Soviet Union had that would basically help to forestall invasion, right? America, we're surrounded by ocean. We got neighbors on north and south, like frozen tundra to the north, huge expansive desert to the south. I mean, it's a fortress, basically. It's part of why our internal problems are so petty is because we can afford to be petty, because we don't have the same problems that literally the rest of the world has. Because either you're dealing with imminent invasion, like Russia and all of continental Europe has constantly been doing and fighting for the last 1,000 years, or you lack food and resources, like basically all of Asia, which has to import all their oil, all their food inputs, fertilizer, things like that. We produce everything here. We have, if you want steel, we have steel. You want lumber, we have lumber. Like, there's literally nothing that we can't produce here besides certain rare earth minerals, right? And so it's like, we are just so lucky to just be in this situation at this point in time, and we don't even realize it, you know, because we concentrate on these little.
So taken for granted.
Yep, I
Yeah.
was just about to say it's taken for granted every single second of our day. Like you sit there and like we started up something like this, and like in other
Exactly.
places, like you don't really necessarily have a voice to speak out and say like what's happening and like
Let
to
alone
voice
even
your
think,
opinion.
let alone even think
Yeah.
outside of this.
Even easy access to high levels of technology, you know,
Yeah.
like where like it's still not lost on me. Like I think because I grew up in Gen X, you know, like we didn't have computers, we didn't have cell phones, we had a landline phone and like cable television, and so it's like I still will freak out like when I'm on my phone. I'm like, I can't believe I'm doing this. Like I
See,
really can't
It's
believe.
so natural for all of us.
Yeah.
To the point now, like I'll be on my phone. I'm like, wow, 2 hours went by, and I like have to throw it across the room because I just don't want to be on
They
it.
actually, you know how you said before we even started the podcast that like we spend a third of our life sleeping.
Mm-hmm.
They just redid the chart for like this newer generation
Oh,
with the
no.
screen time,
Mm-hmm.
and they're saying that like you're almost spending another third on your phone.
Yeah.
So you're spending 2/3 of your life sleeping
That's really
and
interesting.
scrolling on
You-
your
You
phone.
should actually look into that.
Oh my
The amount of
God.
time you're on technology, from watching TV to being on your phone to working on a computer, the amount of screen time
Yep.
is really,
Insane.
really sad. The
I'm
amount of the
telling you.
free time you have in your life to spend with family.
So
and,
you
like,
only have-
friends.
We're so Wally coded right now.
1/3.
Dude, it's crazy.
But
Well, it doesn't help too that like we're descending into a culture of materialism and junk values, and you know like that's what's driving, especially amongst Gen Z, this huge epidemic in anxiety disorders, depression, you know, teen suicides, you know, all these nasty, horrible things like social blights that are happening, and they're happening because our popular culture has descended into basically the promulgation of very, very much junk values. Just like junk food, you know, there's like junk values. And it's literally all the extrinsic stuff, right?
Yeah, like you were saying earlier.
Yeah, like what car do you drive? What kind of shoes are those? What kind of clothing, what brand are you wearing, you know? And there's a reason why philosophers and oracles and wise people throughout time have warned against the pursuit of this sort of thing, is because even if you get it, it's empty, right? And so even if you achieve it, there's nothing within it, and so the answer that you were looking for isn't there, and so you're tormented even more because now you're materially rich and you're still miserable, and you know that's why you have, again, like millionaires and celebrities that are taking on antidepressants and they're killing themselves, you know, because it really doesn't matter what you accumulate materially. If your values are in the wrong place, you're never going to get that thing. You're never going to get that feeling because you're chasing it in the wrong avenues, and you're always going to come up short.
Kids are inspired to be on their phone and be like, oh, that one subscriber, oh, that one follower, that one like.
Well, and unfortunately, social media is
And it's
pushing
endorsing it.
younger and younger kids into more and more materialistic pursuits because they see like YouTube millionaires, and they go like, why the would I want to be a dentist like my dad? Like, you know, that looks hard, that looks boring, whereas I could just be a YouTuber, and it's like,
Live a lavish life like they do.
exactly
Until
and
everyone does it.
exactly, and that's the problem, is that then you over too many people invest in this career path, and then you end up with overinvested career paths. So right now, like traditionally overinvested career paths are things like musician, actor, you know, like painters, right? Because there's way more people trying to do it than there are positions to be successful at it. And so the distribution, so like in any given field, right? Like let's say you go into accounting, usually there's what's called a Pareto distribution in that field, which is the 80-20 rule. So it means that 20% of the people in that field are making about 80% of the money. When you get into overinvested fields, that proportion goes down to like 1 to 99. I mean, it's so skewed. Like when you think about the number of, say, musicians who are successful and making money and making a living at it versus the number of people trying to make a living as a musician, it's way more than 20-80, right? And so that's right now with a lot of the younger generations, it's social media influencing. That's like the number one aspiration for kids in middle schools, is they want to be a social media influencer.
But they don't see the numbers and they
Yeah.
don't see the percentages.
By definition, you can't all do it.
Yeah. Yeah, because then the supply and demand.
Yeah, who's gonna watch it if everyone's making a channel? There's no one around to watch.
Yeah. No, that
They
is.
should make viewing a job then.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I believe they did. I believe I saw something
Yes.
like that.
What?
I was gonna say.
Yep.
So
There's
It is a
actually
job.
no way.
yes,
Yup.
yes. So there are companies that are starting to pay people to view their content.
And see if they like it. So like when they do like a TikTok,
Like
they
what
want to see if it's
captures.
pleasing. If they scroll, how long they're gonna stay.
I mean, they've been doing a form of this for a very long time. It's called test marketing.
Yeah.
It sounds like just tests, but paying people for this.
Yeah,
is
Yes.
I
insane.
swear, no, I
Yes.
swear I saw it. It was just like something about like at-home job. You could literally just sit there and they'd send you stuff to watch. And
Mhm.
it's an at-home job, and it's just to sit there and you're on your phone.
Rotting
Yeah.
home at home job.
Ultimate
That
brain
is
rot.
crazy.
Oh my gosh.
I mean, look, the amount of pitfalls that you guys face is daunting. When I think about it, like, life was so much more simple when I was in college. There was just not as much stuff, right? So there was less knowledge and certainly fewer opportunities and to grow and things like that. But there were also like mistakes weren't permanent like they are now. I mean, Jesus, God forbid you make some bad decision and someone
when you're
is
young.
recording it. That's
It's
you're
It's with
the
you for life.
it's
Yeah.
clip
You get
now.
canceled. I hate cancel culture.
yeah
clip.
yeah
I'm
and
sorry.
so that's a tremendous amount of pressure. I can't even imagine that, to be like, someone who's trying to figure out their way in life and then also deathly afraid of making any kind of mistake or
Yep.
error because it's just going to haunt you for the rest of your life. So I certainly don't envy you guys those factors.
Yeah.
I don't know if I
It's-
should thank you for that.
But one thing I would like to hit on and touch upon is something that you brought up with the way that your mind can actually see something like an artistically. I forget the name. It is like
Aphantasia.
aphantasia. Can
So
you
that's-
explain what that is?
So aphantasia is actually the inability to picture anything
Okay.
in your mind,
Okay.
and that's about 10% of people.
I have that, and the head of the philosophy department also has that.
Okay.
I just found that fascinating. I can't close my eyes and picture an apple.
Yeah.
I've been doing that for years. I just
Yeah.
think of a red apple, and I'm just sitting there, just like pitch dark, just sitting there, like cannot
Yeah.
see what I want.
I had
You have
always
that?
assumed
Yes, so serious.
I had always assumed that everybody can picture stuff in their
Yeah.
mind. Like when you picture a rainbow unicorn, immediately pops
Or
in their
like
head.
rotate a cow in your head.
Mm-hmm.
Rotate a chair in your head. And people
I don't
can't
think
do
I
it.
can.
Yeah. And so it's actually on a spectrum, like what you can and can't visualize.
I
is
could
on
do
a
an apple,
spectrum.
but I can't do a rotating chair. I'm being serious. Like, is
Yeah.
that like a thing?
Yeah. So again, it's the spectrum. So
You're
I
kidding.
can't even
I like
see an
in psych
apple,
class.
Can you see a red dot?
bro. I can't picture anything. I don't know.
Head
If
empty
that's
for
just-
sure. Oh
Wait,
my
this
gosh,
is no
Jared.
okay. This is just blowing my mind right now. So you're telling me that some people can. So there's levels to this. I'm assuming.
yeah, absolutely.
So someone who has, if I word this correctly, the highest level of, what is it?
Aphantasia.
Well,
Ampho-
Well, aphantasia
Aphantasia.
is the inability.
So if they had the highest level of this, they
Mhm.
can't picture anything.
Yeah, that's so someone on the low end of the visualizing spectrum that have aphantasia, yeah, you tell them a description, they cannot picture it.
So someone who would have like the least amount. Do they even have a way of measuring that right now? Like,
I'm not exactly sure how they measure it, honestly. I haven't done too much
Well,
research
it's in
on
your
the
head.
actual
That's the thing. That's what
phenomenon.
probably makes it really hard.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
measuring brain activity,
find
they
that
might
so
be able
cool.
to like
Mhm.
picture that and then do research on it. But
So, is there? I don't know. I'm asking like crazy questions off the spot, so I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'm putting you
No,
right
no,
on it, but
not at all.
like an artist who has that, does it make it harder for them to actually like do the artwork compared to someone who doesn't?
I think
Yeah.
it might help
I
build
would
that.
I would imagine that they would probably have to come up with a whole suite of like compensating behaviors
Yeah.
to get around that. But then again, like compensating behaviors are what sometimes build a person. Like Warren Buffett, for instance, he was dyslexic, And so he came up with a whole suite of like compensating behaviors in order to help him overcome that. And then it helped him later in life because he developed skills, mental skills that other people didn't because he was forced to. And so a lot of the time, yeah, it's like the thing that you think is your biggest limitation ends up being the thing that defines you.
And I remember you saying that like when you got into doing artwork, like your clients would ask for something and then like you would do it, but it wasn't how they envisioned it in their mind, was it?
No, it was what I learned early on was descriptions just didn't work. So I could write stuff down. I could say, okay, it's gonna go this way, and like I'll give you a sketch of it here, but here's how I'm gonna adjust it. It just doesn't work. There might be a handful of people who can take your sketch and then take your description and extrapolate it the way I can in my brain, which I thought, yeah, I'll just give you the pieces and you can assemble it. Nope. You gotta assemble it exactly. So it's like, now, I will design the entire thing, like as finished as I can make it. Then I'll take a picture of the wall and I'll Photoshop the mural up onto the wall so that it's like a photo. This is exactly what it's gonna look like. So they don't have, there's no chance that even the aphantasic of them will misunderstand. Like you gotta just basically like you're creating it under the assumption that they can't visualize anything.
And one of my final questions, at least, was when you were designing the mural for downtown, why did you choose to incorporate the designs, like the designs that you did, versus like realism, clip art, or like even the parts that like someone's skiing, the pumpkin, like the swimmer, like they're essential to script, but I guess why did you choose to put those in and with that style?
Well, so the style was something where, so it's me and my wife, and we paint together. And so I like doing a mixture of graphic and photoreal side by side. I just really love the way that looks. I like the juxtaposition, but it also allows us to divide the labor. So she does all of the graphic stuff, and I do all of the realistic stuff.
Oh, I didn't even think of that.
Yeah, and so it because the blending with aerosols is a skill, and it takes a while to kind of develop, and so it's something that she can't do right now. But she can do insanely meticulous, like graphic work, like buildings and windows and like trains and stuff like that.
Wow.
And so
Yeah, that train's pretty cool. I just remembered.
yeah.
Nice.
So it allows us to divide up the labor really nicely. And then as far as the content, that was really the county, right? So the county put out an RFP, and it was like a national call basically, and they had a creative brief, and that creative brief was pretty specific. They basically wanted the theme to be the four seasons of county. Initially, last year when we got the job, there were different county commissioners, and they told us specifically the county is paying for this mural, not the city, so do not make it a mural. This is a county mural, county money,
Interesting.
so we don't want imagery. I'm like, okay, and
It's
so
insidious.
I know.
That's
I
like
think it was. I remember delving into it more with Brian, I think, but that's so interesting.
so. I'm
That they don't
assuming
want
it
it certain
changed
ways.
because you have Grant and stuff. In
Yeah,
there now.
so then we basically started the piece, and then they published it in the newspaper, and there was so much backlash that basically those commissioners got voted out. Then new commissioners came in this year, and then they worked with the two people that Julie and I have been working with in the county, and they were like, okay, this is about
Wow.
this is a piece. What can you change at this point? Like what can you? And so that's why we added the iron furnaces.
Yeah, I
on
saw the iron first.
the
When you
inbound
first
lane.
started.
So because the inbound lane, we had already done all the paper patterns. We really couldn't change that much because once the paper patterns are done, it's like, yeah, we can redo them, but it's literally 50 hours of work. So it's a lot of trouble.
And it's so beautiful. Like that I don't know. I'm not like an artist, but like looking at that artwork is just so beautiful. Like I would hate for anybody to like be like, "Oh, just this doesn't match the theme." Like it's like I believe every art piece is like unique and different. But like continue, sorry. I just like
Well, I mean, so luckily the inbound lane we hadn't done any of the prep for, and so I was like, hey, look, I'm happy to change anything that you want on the inbound lane, because I was just going by your creative brief, like I'm a trained illustrator, so like my job is to give people what they want in terms of imagery and themes and things like that. And so much of my work is client based that it's just second nature to me to go, okay, what are your notes? What can I incorporate in this? It turns out that like I was literally the only artist that listened to the creative brief. It's crazy to think about, but that was the feedback that I got. They were like, "Thank you for listening to the creative brief. You were literally the only artist team that paid attention to any of it." And I'm like, "Really?" Like,
What the other guy draw?
they said they got a lot of different submissions. They got submissions from Europe and
Really?
yeah, but
Whoa.
but they said that no one listened to the creative brief except for me. So
I wonder, is there a way that you could see the other artists' pieces, like just for you guys?
no, yeah, maybe if I asked one of the directors, they might show it to me, especially once the project is done.
Yeah.
But yeah, so anyway, so then when it came time to redesign the inbound lane, I basically redesigned like 3/4 of it. So, and then I'm really
Yeah.
glad because the feedback that they gave me and the imagery that they actually wanted to see, I preferred to the original creative brief.
Awesome.
And so it was a win-win.
Well, that's good.
That's so cool.
Man, that's just. So you didn't feel like any of the previous stuff, like you much prefer this rather than what you had?
Wait. The previous one, it was like a shopping scene. It was like I had
Oh.
buildings from Drinker Street kind of like going into perspective, and then it was just like 3 different groups of people, that were all out shopping, and it was like it was okay, like
Not potentiality, but
like I was looking forward to painting that many faces and clothing. Like really get into just the minutia of the technical aspects of it, and so I knew I could get into that. But the content itself was a little bit weak. It was based on their feedback, but I was kind of like what can you do in, and so I thought like my wife grew up swimming in a lake, and so I heard lake swimming stories like for years and years. So I was like, I definitely want like a little girl swimming in a lake or something. And then, the skiing was the only part that stayed on the inbound lane. Everything else changed.
That's his favorite. He loves that.
We have mountain that's like pretty close,
Yeah,
so it's like
exactly.
central for everyone that's
Yep.
usually in school.
We are very, very heavy into that. Like,
Yeah,
we
yeah.
love that.
Yeah. And so that was the only part of the original that stayed, and then everything else. So
Wow.
like the flowers changed. It's all like indigenous flowers now, and like before there was a cardinal, and they had me change it to a ruffed grouse, which is like the
state
Pennsylvania
bird.
state bird.
Yep.
Wow.
Which that was, talk about a scary moment, because when I looked up what a ruffed grouse looked like, I was like,
Yeah. It's not the
holy
prettiest.
no,
And they're
the
very,
level
very-
of detail.
Yes, they are very, very like
I was like
detail driven.
trying to figure out like, okay,
it's a unique
like
looking bird.
I've already changed so much on this that I could probably say no to this request if I wanted to. And then I looked at the level of detail and I was like kind of starting to sweat a little bit. And then I was like, okay, I mean, the rule.
All right.
You better say yes to this because it's giving you the the fidgets. And I'm glad I did, because it was
I
fucking
wish I had
challenging.
that much ambition in me where I was just like
push the drive.
just-
That's
I mean, this whole
Wonderful.
project I've done more detail and more things that I thought I wouldn't be able to do on this one project than like the last probably 4 years of growth.
You come out
And-
surprising yourself. Like the bigger things you take on, the more you learn, the more you can grow. From.
Yeah.
and the next
yeah.
thing you're gonna do is 100 square feet, right?
100,000.
100,000. Oh yeah, yeah. My bad. I meant to say 100,000. Whoa, that is so impressive. Yeah,
100 square feet would be like an hour.
10 by
I got
10.
it.
yeah. It's like I'll get that done. 30. But what I enjoy so much is like when we go to class, like in the morning, like I always like,
We
oh,
drive
they're
by it
working.
every day.
And then like during the end of the day, like I come back the same route and like
Yeah.
I slow down. I'm like, oh my gosh, like That's like, it's so impressive how much work you can get done.
This is like you guys working at night with lights on too. I'm like, wow, that's insane.
Yeah, it's there's just a certain number of hours, like for per square foot. If you're going a certain level of detail, then expect X amount of hours, and so you just have to plug in those hours. Like there's no avoiding it.
Yep.
And,
Wow.
you just got to get good with like the good thing about my schedule is when I'm between projects, I have a lot of free time, so I can work on my own projects. I can just around with my VR, like my Oculus or something.
Oh, okay.
And
Not the
just-
Apple though.
no, screw that thing.
5 grand.
But then when I'm on a project, then we're usually working 70 to 75 hours a week.
That's crazy.
Yeah, I mean it's not like IBM engineer
Yeah.
level, but
it's still.
it's also a very active job. Like it's half construction worker because you're going up and down on boom lifts and lifting, buckets of paint and buckets of water, and so it is a very physical job, which is why like it's important to take breaks.
So
Yeah,
impressed.
no, definitely. Well, John, it was a pleasure having you.
Justin,
Thank you so much.
Jared, Jessica.
That chick's a bit of a reach.
Oh my gosh. Before we head out, check out John's Instagram, John Park Art. We'll link it in the description. It'll actually be in the very beginning of the video. You'll see it, and then it'll be right here. It'll be on the screen, and you can check out all his artwork there. Do you have anything you wanna plug for the people?
Just come down to Scranton. See the mural. It's on the Biden Expressway. You
Check
can't
it
miss it.
out. It is phenomenal, and it's gonna blow your shoes off and socks.
Oh, a dog's out.
We will also be having some drone shots, hopefully.
Oh, yeah.
Nice.
Be waiting for that. Catch you guys in the next one.